here now. You guys should hear it. I won't hear it, but you should. Did you hear the recording thing?
Yeah, we got the message here.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
we got the memo, Fred. We got the memo. Yeah,
Well, see,
yeah.
as host here, I don't see that kind of stuff. It doesn't pop up on my screen.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
so the tonight's session is particularly designed for people who don't have too much knowledge about bees and don't have bees yet necessarily. And we're going to try to get you headed in the right direction on the decision process. Should I have bees? Should I not? And if I do decide that I'd like to have bees, honeybees, what do I need to do that? So the session tonight is going to be what you need. It's not going to be how to be a beekeeper. We, as Robin has a fantastic, Robin Foldesy here on the screen, he's our co-host today and has really been leading the charge on sessions for new and prospective beekeepers. But he has this great saying, and I'm going to try to remember tonight. He said, when you get into beekeeping, your first year can seem like you're drinking out of a fire hose. It can come at you so fast that it's hard to keep up with it. So we're going to take it a step at a time. And this session is the hows, helping you decide if you want to keep bees. And then secondly, we have a series of sessions coming up throughout the summer, some specific topics and some called Ask Me Anything that are seasonally oriented that will tell you how as the season progresses. So, if you've got bees coming and you don't know how yet, not to worry. That's how I started too. I took a class, I did all the stuff that we're talking about here tonight. But I didn't know how to be a beekeeper until I attended a number of workshops throughout my first year. And so that will be the follow-up that you'll need to do if you decide you want to go ahead with beekeeping. So I've got a short PowerPoint here I want to talk to. This session is recorded, but I'm going to also post this PowerPoint on the Vermont Beekeepers Association website so that it will be accessible after this if you want to look at some of the details, because there are some details in here, lists of items that you'll need, costs and things like that. And I'm not going to pour over adding up dollars and cents tonight. I just want to give you an idea of what things you need to think about.
Yeah,
So
and Fred, can I jump in for a
you
second?
certainly may pop right up.
Yeah, thanks. So I just want to also put in a little plug here. The Vermont Beekeepers Association is making really a concerted effort to try to engage with new beekeepers and help new beekeepers as much as we possibly can. And so we have a couple of new initiatives going on. We're going to have some new information posted on our website, targeted specifically for new beekeepers, including resource lists and information for a future helpline that should be launched actually probably within the next week or so. So if you're not a member of the VBA, I really strongly encourage you to do so. The cost is nominal. I think it's $15 a year. Do you know, Fred, exactly what it
Yeah, if
is?
students are 5, individuals are 15, families 20.
Yeah, so I mean, it's about the cost of a lunch at Burger King or something like that. And it's a great investment, even if you're just considering becoming a beekeeper. So I really do encourage you to do that. The other thing I would also urge people to do, you don't have to if you don't feel comfortable, but turn the video on your screen so Fred can see you. We won't judge you, so no judgment zone here. So, but with that, I'll turn it over to Fred.
So thanks, Robin. So I recognize a few faces here too. I know some of you are not, or you're cheating and you're beekeepers already, and you have been for a year or 30, but that's okay. You're still welcome. So we'll get this popped up here. Okay, should be able to see yellow slide here, right?
Yep, we can
Okay,
see it.
great, fantastic. So we're going to talk about what you need to get started in beekeeping today. And I have to move a little something here off to the side so I can see things.
Yep.
Okay, all right. So moving along, theme for today is we're going to talk about what you need to get into small scale beekeeping. This is not commercial beekeeping. I run a commercial operation, but I run the same kind of equipment that you run. It's not like migratory beekeeping where, beekeepers have, an operator will have 10,000 colonies, and we'll be shipping them all over the country. It's not that scale of things. This is more like you would have an operation in your backyard or 2 or 3 apiaries. So we're going to focus on small scale beekeeping and what you need to get into the business. Also, we're going to cover up how-tos, like I said, cover how-tos in future sessions. So we're not going to get too deeply into beekeeping. However, if some of you have questions regarding how-tos at the end, as long as we've covered the what's, we can go ahead and answer those as well. So you can consider this thing to be like a beginning buying guide. What am I going to need? So there are several categories of things. There are some legal requirements to be a beekeeper. There are some educational things that Robin was kind of just alluding to. You'll need an electric fence system. You're going to need bees. You're going to need some beekeeping equipment and supplies. Potentially honey harvesting equipment. If not your first year, then potentially eventually you will. And then you're going to have some steps to take for some things you'll need for fall and winter colony management, which is quite different from the rest of the year. And then there are a couple of miscellaneous things too. So we'll go over each of those in a little bit more detail. And by the way, if anybody has questions as we go, I'm okay with you just popping up and, unmuting yourself and asking your questions to interrupt me. If it gets to be too many, then I'll ask you to wait. But most of the time, it's doable if you want to just pop up and ask your question right away. So we're going to be looking at a couple of different items and expenses in a couple of different ways. There are startup items, and then there are some ongoing expenses. The big ticket items are startup. What do you need that first year or two to get into the business, and then after that, you'll see that the costs in the subsequent years are much, much lower. You'll need, a lot of these things are going to be one-time purchases, and then after that, you won't have to make those purchases again, unless you expand, of course. And one thing I want to make really clear here in the beginning. So when you talk about a beehive is like the house that you live in. It's the house that the bees live in. When I talk about hive, it's going to be the structure. And when I talk about colony, it's going to be the living thing, like you who live in your house, the honeybees who live in their house. So the colony is the living thing, the bees, and the hive is the house. Just so that when we start talking about pieces and parts, that will make sense. So I was asked also to give outline a few tips for locating your apiary. If you haven't done this already, if you're trying to assess your area, the first thing you want to have, hopefully, is some kind of a south-facing area where the hives can receive the sun during the winter. Winter is a critical time when it's really cold for a long period of time. Having sun shining on the hive allows the colony inside to be warm enough at some point so they can move around to get to food that's stored in the hive. Their food being, of course, the honey. If you can be near an AC power outlet for your electric fence, that's ideal. But if not, you want a sunny area for your solar energizer solar panel so that it can keep your batteries charged up, particularly in the winter. Should be protected from strong winds, but you can also add windbreaks, and that will be coming up in a session later on in the year where we talk about windbreaks when we talk about fall prep. There's no need to worry about windbreaks right now, or even for your first 2 or 3 months. But if you can locate your apiary where it's protected by trees or just by terrain from strong winds, that's helpful. It should be at least 20 feet from woods lines. Now, I'm not talking fence lines like out in the middle of a bunch of fields. I'm talking a continuous woods area. You want to avoid backing your apiary fence up against the woods line because that's where bears will kind of hang out and assess whether or not they want to try to bust into your apiary. So if you can leave a little space there, that's a little bit of a deterrent from bears hanging out too close to your fences. The apiary should be large enough. And, and I don't know how many colonies and hives you're going to have inside your apiary. An apiary, by the way, if you don't know, is just this place where you have a bunch of beehives set up, honeybee hives. So the apiary needs to be large enough to allow at least 6 feet between the fence and the hive body, the structure. And that's to prevent the bears from reaching through your fence and grabbing onto it and pulling it toward them. And that, I actually had a fellow down in Amsden, Vermont, a couple of years ago who was having that issue because his hives were about 3 feet from the fence, and the bear was easily able to reach in and grab it and pull it over. So 6 feet between the fence and the apiary. So this is a consideration before you go building a fence, to make sure you have enough space in there. Number one, so you have this 6 foot separation, but also so that you have room enough to work inside the apiary, maintaining the hives and colonies. And your hive entrances should face away from people routes. Hopefully there aren't any sidewalks or backyard paths or anything like that, that where the entrances face toward those paths. Just some general tips. And we'll go over this later on in the year too, and in some of the other sessions. But in the meantime, you can be thinking about those things. So getting started in beekeeping, anytime you buy a colony in the state of Vermont, that colony has to come with what's called a health certificate. And it's not your responsibility to provide that, but you should ask for it to make sure that your colonies have been inspected and that they're healthy, at least to the extent that we can tell that they're healthy early on in the season. That's not your responsibility. That's a responsibility of the seller to provide the health certificate to you. And then you need to register your apiary with the state of Vermont, and that costs $10 per apiary, not per hive, but per apiary. So wherever you've got your apiary located, it's going to cost $10 a year. And it's a legal requirement since 2015. And a lot of it has to do with controlling disease that was rampant and deadly. And it also allows the state bee inspector, who we support we support the position of the state bee inspector to help us out. It allows that person to communicate with you if there is a disease or insecticide spraying or something like that they know about within 2 miles of your apiary, so that you can be on guard for that. They'll also provide some advice, but they need to know where you are to be able to notify you. Okay, learning how to tend bees. So if you haven't taken a class yet, there are 2 or 3 really good ones coming up in Vermont, and they actually are posted in a session that we did. I think it was late January, wasn't it, Robin? Where we listed the classes that are coming up.
Yeah,
There are one at CBU. There's one that Ross Conrad does in the Middlebury, Lincoln, Vermont area, and then Vermont Beekeeping Supply and White Mountain Apiaries over in Whitefield, Whitefield, New Hampshire, also do classes.
Yeah, and if I could jump in, Fred, Bill Mares and Deborah Rubin are sponsoring one in up at Champlain Valley Union High School. Starts May 6th. I think it's entitled the basics of beekeeping, 3 evenings in May. First one's May 6th, and you can register through the VBA website for that. And I don't remember what the cost is. There is a charge for it. Yeah. But if someone hasn't taken any kind of course, I would encourage that would be a good one.
Yeah, CBU is the class that was the class that I was talking about, the Champlain Valley Union High School. The Ross Conrad class is a 2-day class that also is excellent. The reason, Ross Conrad's class is particularly good because you get some hands-on experience, and the same with Vermont Beekeeping Supply and White Mountain Apiaries. You get some hands-on experience, which is really helpful. Learning how to use the hive tool, learning how to pull frames out of the boxes correctly without killing your queens and your bees and things like that. So the class is really a foundation. It's not the end all, but boy, if you haven't taken a class like Robin, I would really strongly recommend you do it. And that's kind of the price range there, $50 to $100 is kind of what it costs, but it's definitely worth spending the 2 or 3 days on that money to get that foundational knowledge. So there are some select texts available too, and that was also listed in the last session that we did. That was posted on the VBA website, and you don't have to. These are beekeeping texts that I'm talking about, and there are half a dozen really good ones. We found a manual from New Hampshire, 4-H manual on beginning beekeeping. All of these are free if you're in Vermont, especially. through interlibrary loan. All of the books that we put on the select text list are available. So you can go to your local library, ask for the text, and they can find it and get it to you from another library if they don't have it in stock. It is really helpful, even after you've taken a class, it is really helpful to have a mentor, somebody who can help you on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis with issues that that are going to pop up in the management of your hives and your colonies. There also will be, once you've taken these other things, done the text, done the beekeeping class thing, there's something that is going to be up and running this year for the first time called the Beekeeper Helpline, where if you run into an issue that didn't get covered in the class that you took or some other session that you've been to, it's an unusual question, you can call an advisor who has some experience with beekeeping, who can help you work your way through that question. The Beekeeper Helpline is not for, and it's not an excuse for you not learning. The help advisors are going to quickly be able to determine that you didn't take time to learn in the beginning, and they're going to tell you to do that rather than keep asking questions day after day after day. But it's just for questions that didn't necessarily get covered in some workshop or some unusual thing that you've run into. And this is all free. This is available through the Vermont Beekeepers Association.
Yeah, Fred, can I ask a question? There was a question on the chat, and I don't know the answer to myself. If someone signs up through the VBA to get a mentor, when can they expect to hear back?
Well, they should hear back pretty quickly, but the problem is we've had trouble finding people who are willing to commit the time to be mentors. It is a fairly time-consuming thing. Backing up for just a second, I can't emphasize this screen here enough. The learning curve in your first year of beekeeping is really steep. There is a lot to learn. It's not just like buy a hive, put some bees in it, sit it in the backyard, and then go get some honey at the end of the summer. That's not how it's going to work. There's a whole lot more to it than that, and that's what this beekeeping class is going to help you with. And we're going to cover some more aspects of this soon. But the mentor is one way of getting this basic knowledge on a week-to-week basis from somebody who's experienced. However, there aren't very many people who have the ability to commit that amount of time to be a mentor. So a lot of the learning comes back on you to attend these classes, to read some of these selected books, to get to the local workshops that are going to be held throughout the summer in different parts of the state, local club workshops. So it's going to come back onto you to learn. So you may not have a mentor. The bottom line is, it may not be a mentor available for you. The best you might get.
But I will also add that, I think I'm entering my 6th season now. But when I first learned beekeeping, I did not have a mentor. But I did a lot of reading, and I went to open hive demonstrations at the South Yard, the VBA South Yard, and I asked questions from time. I found people who would answer my questions, and so that's the way I learned. So having a mentor is great, but it's not essential.
Yeah, I too. I did everything that you said. I put about 2,000 miles on my vehicle before, because we didn't have Zoom at the time, so I had to travel by vehicle. But it was a pretty intense learning curve the first year and even into the second year, doing exactly as you said. I too didn't have a mentor, but I did have a couple of people who were willing to be advisors. I had done the basic learning, but then as I ran into individual stuff, there were a couple of people I could get on the phone with and ask and get some advice. And so that was really helpful. So it's not absolutely necessary to get a mentor. If you can't find a mentor, you really need to go back and be doing these other learning things first. And my screen has stopped. Here we go. So the New Hampshire Beekeeping Manual, there's the link right there. It's a 4-H beekeeping manual. You can do a Google search and this will pop right up. It's a really good introduction. It goes actually even into some recipes for how to use honey, which isn't going to help you much on keeping bees, but it is a pretty comprehensive manual. And when I was looking through it, it looked like it has some reliable information. So that, and speaking of reliable, that's one in your first year. In my first year too, my first couple of years, it was really hard to sort out whose knowledge, whose information whose advice I could trust. I was, you can be on podcasts, you can be on websites, you can be on Facebook pages and see all sorts of stuff coming at you. And a lot of it is just truly not applicable to our geographic area where we have cold winters. And some of it is just plain bogus. I mean, you just don't know for sure, especially when you're first starting out. And it can be really, really confusing to see this flood of stuff coming at you and it makes no sense. And part of the reason is because it may make no sense. So learning whose information is reliable and trustworthy is really a critical thing. And that's where we're trying to steer you here in the beginning to the local clubs, to the VBA, to these books and manuals, to these classes. These are reliable sources of information on how to keep bees in New England. So why bother educating myself? I mentioned this was there's a steep learning curve the first year, and I can guarantee you that unless you take the time and take the actions necessary to manage your colonies, your bees are going to die. Maybe by November your first year, maybe by January your first year, might get lucky and they'll make it as far as March. But more than 9 out of 10 times, people who do not take aggressive action on managing their bee colonies will lose the colonies, usually in total, their first year, maybe even the second year. And it can be a wrenching thing, especially if you have put a lot into trying to keep these bees hive. If you've ignored them, well, it's not going to be wrenching. But the reality is that it is really easy to lose your bees. They die unless they're cared for. So here's a sentiment that comes from Sherry Englert, who's in Williamstown, Vermont, runs Vermont Beekeeping Supply. In her seasonal message that came out to beekeepers a day or two ago, she said, "The days are too soggy to clean out the die-outs, that's dead colonies, now," and this is in March. "It's a sad enough job to do, and I don't need to be wet and cold on top of a broken heart. I hate it when my bees die." That's the gut punch that you get when your bees die on you. So you really do need to take the time to do the learning. And we'll talk about some other things regarding time here before we get all done. So your electric fence system, and this is where I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time, but number one, before you get your bees out there on the ground, you need to have the electric fence up first. Because I guarantee, even if you've never seen a bear in your neighborhood, as soon as you put a honeybee colony out there, the bears will find it and they'll destroy it. We see it happen every year from people who didn't get around to putting up the electric fence or who didn't believe. Anymore, it's tougher to ignore it because bears are pretty much every place, unless you have your colonies, your hives located on the top of a tall building in Burlington, Vermont, or if you're located in the Champlain Islands, you're lucky enough there aren't any bears out there yet. But unless you're in some extreme location like that, the bears are going to find your colonies and they will destroy the colony. So these are the things that you're going to need. And we just did a session last week, and there will be some things posted shortly on electric fence systems. There'll be quite a bit more detail than what you see here. But these are kind of the basic things that you'll need. Electric fence systems, depending upon how fancy you want to be with it, can be $350 to $525, a range, depending upon what pieces and parts you use to build your fence. You can also make the fence really, really complicated and put a bunch of wooden posts and hog panels and all sorts of deterrent things. Obstructive things. We're talking about deterrent kind of fencing, electric fencing. So if you think that's a lot of money, consider that when you put a hive and a live colony in there, a full-size production colony, 4, 5, 6 boxes tall, will be worth $1,500, and when you get up to 6 boxes tall, it might be closer to $2,000. So that's what you've got on the line with each box that's out there. So in your first year, the boxes aren't going to be worth quite that much. But as they grow throughout the summer, they'll become more and more valuable. And so that's what your electric fence is protecting. Every single colony out there is going to be in the range of $1,500, some a little more, some quite a bit, some a little less rather, and some quite a bit more. So electric fence has to come number one before you put the bees out there. So you'll also need to find bees. Uh, there are a couple of options here, and I got some pictures here I'll show you. There's a thing called a nucleus colony, and there's a thing called a package, which is about 3 pounds of bees, about 10,000 bees. And I'll show you here the difference in a second. When you're starting out and you don't have anything, you're going to need to go for that nucleus colony thing. It's more likely that they're going to get started for you and survive and do okay the first year than a package. I'll show you why here right now. So $150 for a package, $230 for some nucleus colonies. You can get them for a little less than that too, but that's kind of the range of prices out there now for buying colonies of bees. That's per each colony that you buy your first year. So a nucleus colony is going to come, there's some variations on this, but over here on the left, that's a 5-frame nucleus colony. That's typical. There's some people who sell 3 frames. There are some who sell 6. The 5 is by far the most common. And this is a colony that has been in existence for a while, sometimes a month, sometimes 2 or 3 months. But the queen is laying. They have a full structure. The population structure is complete from young bees to old bees that are out foraging and ready to die. I mean, it's a full range of age of bees, and the queen is laying. Whereas a package, and these frames in here on the left, they're fully drawn out with comb. They'll have some honey in them. They'll have brood, new bees being formed. So they're already a viable colony all on their own. They could live in that box if you were really wise about your management, but you need to transfer them out into your regular hive box. But they are a functioning, established colony. The package is a bunch of bees that got shaken into this box. They'll be on the upper right. You have no idea what the age structure is of those bees. So if they're a bunch of older bees, when you install that package into a regular hive, they might take off. If they're a bunch of older bees, they're going to have a population drop right away, and it's going to take a long time for them to come back to being a productive colony. You just don't know what you're getting with a package. And not only that, but there is no drawn comb. There are no comb on frames. You're going to be putting these bees into an empty box unless you have been able to get some boxes that have comb, drawn out comb frames in them already. But if you're just buying new equipment, you're not going to have drawn comb. They will have no place to go to start with. They will have no place to start storing food, to raise young, and they're going to have to build that comb first. So if you're first starting out, you want to stick with a 5-frame nucleus colony. If you are going into a second year, you already have some frames that have honeycomb on them, drawn honeycomb on them, then a package would be more appropriate. But in your first year, stick with the 5-frame nukes.
Yeah, Fred, if I could jump in, a comment and a question. When I got started, I started with a package, and I was able to successfully start. Although since that time, I've also bought a nuke, and a nuke does take off. I mean, if you have a good nuke, those things like just take off like a rocket. And it is much easier with a nuke. But again, a package will work. The question I have, Fred, is does the VBA, I know the VBA is not going to endorse any particular suppliers of bees, either packages or colonies. But does it have information on its website about, there you go. Great minds think alike.
Yeah, this is on the website. These are the places in Vermont and near Vermont where they're reliable sources for bees. These are, you look down the list here, Troy Hall, all apiaries over in across the river in New Hampshire, and Pollyannas up in Jeffersonville, Andrew Monkworth out in Cornwall. These are all good beekeepers. Mike Palmer has some of the best queens in the world. These are all good beekeepers. So if you're getting either packages or nucleus colonies from these folks, you're going to do okay.
Yeah, and I will add, if you if anybody is planning on starting, this spring, and you haven't ordered your bees, whether it's a package or a colony, I would recommend that you do it ASAP at this point.
There are still nukes available right now. I know that Sotheby's was advertising that they have some of these producers here do spring splits, and so they will still have some. So you can still get them, but you're going to have to put your order in here pretty soon because within a month or so, they're going to be sold out. So as far as the hive parts are concerned here, we're going to talk a little bit about the pieces and parts that you'll need. And this is strictly the hive. We've talked about the bees, the colony, and now we're going to talk about the hive, the house. So, and I'll show you some pictures of these things here in a second. So in case the words don't mean anything. So you can have, you can be very simple, or you can get really complicated with some of these things, and particularly the base, the stand that your hives sit on. You're going to need a complete hive setup, 2 deeps, and I'm using jargon here, but deeps are one type of bee box. Mediums are a smaller bee box, not quite so tall. This is where the frames and the bees live. Covers to go on top, an entrance reducer, a base for the hive to sit on, queen excluder, and waxed frames. These are all pieces that you will definitely need your first year. You have to have this kind of stuff to be able to even keep bees. You're going to need to have 1 extra empty deep per colony, deep box, and I'll show you a picture of that here in a second. And especially in the first year, but even as the years go by, you're going to need feeder or feeders, depending. And there are a lot of options here, and the prices range considerably, as you can see on the right-hand side. Depending, and like I said, I'll show you the pictures, and you can see why. Total cost per hive is going to run from 350 plus or minus to almost 550 plus or minus, depending upon how fancy you get with some of these pieces and parts. So hive boxes right here in the middle. This is kind of what the setup is going to look like. This is a standard what's called Langstroth that has removable frames. The frames are up here on the top. So as you can see here, and this label kind of covers it up, the 2 bottom boxes are a little bit deeper. The 2 top boxes are not quite so deep. These are called deeps. These are called mediums. This is where the brood tends to be, or where you try to keep the brood, is down here in these bottom boxes. And then the bees will transport nectar up into the top boxes. And this is where your queen excluder can come in handy to keep the queen from going up in there and laying eggs, if you choose to do it that way. But this is where the honey is stored, and these are often called supers. They're medium depth boxes, but they're called honey supers. That's where the honey is kept. Those are the boxes in the end that you would pull off to extract honey during the harvest time. This box here on the right, it's 1 single deep box. It's wise to have 1 of those per hive, and this is in prepping for winter. That can be where your feeders are housed late in the season, and you don't need to know anything about how to do that yet. We're going to cover that, and you're going to have a really good session coming up in that in September, before we get into this kind of work. But you will need 1 of those, and there are some other reasons for having an empty box hanging around too. Frames, these will come with this setup, if depending upon where you order stuff. You can buy this entire thing as a kit from beekeeping suppliers. Better Bee on Greenwich, New York, Man Lake, closest place for them is Pennsylvania, and other places sell entire kits like this. And the boxes will come with frames inside. And so the question that gets asked is, what kind of, these frames have what's called foundation. So this stuff, the frames themselves are the wooden thing around the outside out here. And the foundation is the stuff that's in the middle. This is where bees will build honeycomb. And there are a couple of different options. Actually, there are several options, but I'm only going to talk about 2 here as a beginning beekeeper. One is wax foundation, which is 100% pure beeswax. It has little hexagonal cells imprinted in it. And the other is, the other is plastic foundation that is coated with beeswax that also has hexagonal shaped cells imprinted in it. So the question is, which is better? And the answer is neither. They're both good. You choose what you want. Any good wax frames from commercial suppliers, they have wires in them that hold them in place, so you can put them through an extractor. I use 100% wax plastic, because they're a lot more durable for a commercial operation. You know, when I'm running it through extractors 3 or 4 times a year. Both of them work fine. You don't have to be, it doesn't have to be wax, it doesn't have to be plastic, it can be either one, it can be a mix. It doesn't make any difference. They're both good. So the hive bases, you can get a really fancy hive base like this one down here on the bottom right. And then you can also have something as simple where it sits on a couple of cement blocks. That would cost about $5. Well, I guess cement blocks are a little bit more expensive now, probably $7 or $8 for a 2-block hive base, whereas this one over here is going to be pretty costly. So you can choose what you want. You can be fancy, and there are other ways of building them beside this right here too. This is kind of the range of things. When you look at operations like Mike Palmer, who has hundreds of hives, and Andrew Moncrist and some of the others, they're not putting them on these expensive bases. They're sitting on cement blocks or something even less than that. And around here, those are totally fine. So anyway, you can choose how you want to do it. There are some disadvantages to having tall hive stands, namely that you've got to get up on there to pull boxes off. So you've got to have space on that frame for, you're not standing on the ground any longer. You're standing up on an elevated device. So you have to think twice about what kind of base you're going to put under your hives. And
Fred,
feeders, yep.
Fred, I've seen people put their hives on pallets, wooden pallets. Is that acceptable?
That's one of the others that I mentioned. Yes, there are quite a few people who do use wooden pallets, and if migratory beekeepers, that's all they do. They have their hives established on wooden pallets, and they carry them around with a forklift. But you can use a wooden pallet. If you're going to use a wooden pallet, get a pretty heavy duty one to start with. I happen to be lucky in my town that there's a pallet making company here that has leftovers that come in, and they weigh about 70 or 80 pounds a piece for a 4x. I mean, you have to have a hand truck to move them around. 4x4 pallets, and those are fantastic. They're low to the ground. They're inexpensive. Sometimes you can get them for free. So yeah, pallets are fine. You'll just have to replace them every now and then. Wooden pallets are going to rot out eventually, but you have to replace them every, I don't know, 6-7 years maybe, or however, depending upon however heavy the pallet is. But yeah, you can use a pallet. That's totally good.
And Fred, somebody has asked, why are bases needed? Why do you need a base at all?
Well, you can't set this box down on the ground. Number one, it's going to rot out really fast. Where I'm shining my laser here is the baseboard of the hive. There's a baseboard right there. It's the bottom piece of the hive. But you can't set that on the ground for a couple reasons. Number one, it will rot out really fast, and that's a pricey piece of the hive. You want to keep that elevated up off the ground. And also, when you get it down at ground level, it's really easy for mice to run in the entrance during the summertime. So, and you don't want mice in your beehive. Even with an active colony in there, mice can still get in and start destroying. They'll make it really smelly, drive the bees away. They'll start eating the comb. So you want to get it up off the ground, mostly so that it's up out of the snow. And also in the wintertime, you don't want these things sitting on the ground. The snow will pile up and block those entrances. So you want it up off the ground a little bit for those reasons. It doesn't have to be high up off the ground around here. In the South, if you're sitting here and you're from Georgia or Carolinas or any place in the South, you have to contend with small hive beetles. And on those, you'd want a little bit taller, and you'd want legs if you could, particularly smaller legs, not these big wooden legs. As a way of preventing beetles from getting up into your hives. And this is a very simple thing. I'm not getting into pest management here now, but there are lots of different ways of building bases. But my recommendation to you would be keep it simple to start, and then if you want to get fancy later on.
Yeah.
And then Fred, feeders. Let me talk about feeders, and then we'll come to the rest of the questions.
Yeah.
So there are different kinds of feeders, and these are not all that there are. This is just an example of feeders. Inverted canning jars, 2-quart canning jars there. Inverted unused paint cans. There are top feeders that you can buy from commercial beekeeping suppliers. There are frame feeders too, but for winter preparation, you're going to want to stick with some kind of a top feeder. And again, these are either a little more costly or less expensive, but you will need them, especially getting a colony started, a young colony started. You're going to need to put feeders on until they have enough foraging bees that they can support themselves, and colonies that are underweight, and we'll tell you how to figure that out later on in the year, underweight going into the winter will also have to be fed in a certain way, and these will become necessary. And this is why you need that extra deep box, is to cover these feeders up in the wintertime, I mean in the fall. You can't leave them open like this. You have to cover them up. In other words, a box is going to sit on top of that, and then the covers are going to go on top of that empty box. And that's why you need this empty box will be essential. Go ahead with the question now.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I was going to say, let's pause here for a minute. And if anybody has any question, wants to unmute themselves, ask away.
I just had a comment, and on that picture with the cinder blocks, and we can see the holes oriented horizontally. That's important that they be oriented that direction. If you orient them the other direction vertically, it just becomes a nest for other critters. For the new people out there might need to notice that those are, so the air can go through them, they don't become nests.
Yep. Thank you for that, Bruce.
Okay. Other questions?
Hi, I'm just going to jump in. I had a quick question. So actually two, we're just over on the other side of the lake, south of Ticonderoga. Do you know if we have any, if we need to pay a fee to the state of New York? Do you happen to know anything about that?
About what? Now, say that again, Marjorie. I couldn't catch it.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we're actually in the state of New York, just on the other side of Lake Champlain. Do you know if we need to pay a fee to New York to license our bees or whatever the process is?
Yeah, it's required in most of the states around us now, registration. Joan, what's Joan? Tony Anthony.
Mahoney.
Joan Mahoney. Joan Mahoney is your
There's no fee with the registration in New York.
Okay.
It's just register your hives, and that's pretty much it. But Joan Mahoney is the apiary inspector.
Yeah, if you look on the New York State it'll be. I'm not familiar with New York State's agricultural website, but it will be in the agricultural part of their website. You look for the apiary program. These names and requirements will pop up. Now, Tony, is this registering hives or registering apiaries?
Well, it's both. I mean, you register your site and you tell them how many hives you have in the site.
Same as Vermont. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And my other quick question is, I would just love to have somebody come and tell me, okay, put your bees here, but we have quite a bit of property. One's on a tree stand, and I thought that might be a good place for a windbreak, but it's also a forest. We also have an unused but well-fortified barn. Like, what are your feelings about having it keeping your hives in a barn?
Well, you see increasingly, and I'm not going to get into management too much here tonight, but in terms of apiary location, you see increasingly people, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it as time goes on, using some kind of a structure at various times to store their to house their colonies. The thing about bees is that you can't close them, you can't have them in an enclosed barn. They have to have open access to the outdoors so they can fly and forage and also to defecate. So
it's quite open.
If they are in a barn, that'll provide some wind protection for sure. And that is the advantage that putting them in a barn would have, but they need to be able to get outside really easily without having to struggle and get caught behind window panes and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say, if you're considering putting them in a building, take a look at Slovenian beekeeping.
Okay.
And it's possible to, if you can modify your barn, put them right up to the outside wall where the opening goes out, and inside they're protected, but they really need to have pretty easy egress out of that hive and know what the weather is like and when the sun comes up, because siting your hive, again, southeast direction to get the sun, that wakes up the bees. So if they're in a dark barn, they may never get out when they should. And with pollen, and nectar, some plants only produce it certain times of the day and they could miss it. So, but if you could put it against the wall and have the opening on the going to the outside, it's possible to do it that way. It's done in other European countries.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's possible, but you know, if it were me and I'm just barely getting started, I wouldn't add more complicating factors than absolutely necessary my first year. So, you know, you could use the barn as your windbreak and keep them outdoors. That would be really helpful, especially if it's a south-facing wall. That's going to actually be really ideal because you're going to get a lot of reflected radiant heat off that barn. So rather than take a chance on messing things up by having them inside or even partly inside, use the barn as a protective screen, especially, like I said, if you can find a south-facing wall, put your apiary there. It also gives you one less side that you have to fence off.
And it gives you a possible power source for your fence. So
we have another, if I can jump in, we have another question from Christian. Christian, did you want to ask your question?
Sure. Since we were on the topic of feeders, I'm brand new while I'm on the class. I was actually at Better Bee last weekend picking up my hive kit and looking at the different things they had in their store. And in addition to top feeders, I saw this feeder that was basically like a fat plastic frame that hangs in the bee box. Any pros and cons of that? Because it seems like you could pack a bunch of them in an extra deep.
Yeah, that's what you don't want to do, though. That's what you don't want to do. Okay, so, and the reason for that, and that's why actually if I didn't bring them up, I know there are lots of different kinds of frame feeders, but I purposely did not bring them up because what you're doing is taking away space for the bees to raise brood and also for them to store honey for the winter. Okay, so that's why I didn't bring, that's why I'm recommending to start out with a top feeder. The other thing that we haven't gotten to yet, all of these pieces and parts are based upon getting 8-frame equipment, not 10-frame equipment, which is even more important than to use top feeders and not frame feeders because you're taking up valuable internal space that the bees need for storing honey and raising new bees. And the reason I recommend going with 8-frame equipment, I have all 10-frame equipment right now, and I've got a lot invested in it. And if I could start over again, I would have started with 8-frame equipment, knowing what I know now. And it has to do, one, with the weight involved. The deep boxes are going to weigh about 20 pounds less when you have to handle them. Rather than weighing 90 pounds, they're going to weigh 70 pounds or, you know, that kind of thing. And the same with the honey supers. But the other thing is bees build comb better in narrower boxes. It takes a really, really long time for bees to build comb out into frame number 1 and 10, way on the outsides. Whereas in an 8-frame box, they'll build out a lot more quickly and they won't leave these 2 frames empty on the outside as much. They like to build comb going up, not going out. And so that's why one of the reasons I'm recommending sticking with a Langstroth and not some other kind of hive that goes horizontally, and also the 8-frame because the bees are going to build wax comb more quickly for you. And in your first year or two, building comb is your main issue. It's your main problem. It's the thing that you have to have. Honeycomb is like gold to bees and a beekeeper. And building that comb happens a lot faster in a narrower box. So there are frame feeders, but I would start with top feeders and say this if you really want something that's purchased and manufactured, this kind of top feeder right here works really slick.
Can I ask a question about timing?
Yep.
I understand about the education and planning ahead, ordering, say, nukes well ahead of time, but is there generally a window of time, the month of May, or just some sort of 4 to 6 week period that is, as a general rule, the time to start a hive? I know there's a lot of variables with the kind of winter that's been experienced, but is there a general rule about timing?
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about Vermont from bottom of the valley to the top of the hills and north to south. It does make a difference. Generally, colonies will be available, but mostly they're not going to be available until sometime in May. Maybe some of them even in June. And it's not too late to establish nucleus colonies in June, or even packages for that matter, if you've got drawn comb. So mid-May to early part of June is the ideal time to be setting up colonies here. You have to really, as a beekeeper, you really have to be tuned into the weather. Bees, apiculture in general, is more highly dependent on the weather than almost any other agricultural endeavor out there. I grew up on a dairy farm, and we grew all sorts of field crops, and nothing was as dependent on the weather as our bees are. And so establishing them, you don't want to be getting them established too soon when it's getting down into the 20s every night still, or even frequently. By the 10th of May, 15th of May, in the valleys, you're good to be starting to establishing, get your nucleus colony, get them set up. If you don't get them until the second week of June, you're still okay. You know, the second week of June is prime time for nectar production in these parts. And so there's going to be plenty of food out there, plenty of pollen for them, plenty of nectar. So it's not too late. There is that 6-week period from the first week or two of May till mid-June that are pretty much ideal for establishing your new colonies.
Great, thank you very much.
Yep. We good to move on?
Yeah, let's move on, Fred.
So one of the cautions that I want, and I'm glad you said you went to Better Bee, Christian, and got your hive kit there. You have to be really careful about accepting or buying used hive parts, particularly the boxes and the frames, where the bees lived. And you only want to do that if you can, for 100% certain, verify that that equipment did not hold a colony infected with American foul brood. American foul brood is a bacterial disease. In the process of its life cycle, it kills off the larvae, the pupating bees in the cells, and produces spores. That's how they reproduce and keep their cycle going. It produces spores. Those spores can last, depending upon who you listen to, 70 years, 7 decades, or sometimes even longer. So something that's been stored in the barn for a while, you have to be really suspicious about why that stuff ended up in the barn and they stopped beekeeping. American foul brood used to be very prevalent. It was kind of ubiquitous every place. Every farmer had bees and every farmer had American foul brood, or most all of them did. The problem with that is that the only way of dealing with American foul brood is to burn your hive and the colony. To burn the bees and the colony, that's the only way of destroying the spores. There's some caveats to the boxes, but in general, you have to burn. There's nothing that actually will get rid of American foul brood once it's established. And the main source, there are 2 main sources for American foul brood in Vermont in the last 5 or 6 years. One was migratory beekeeper who brought the stuff in from another state. They got that stuff under control, got it quarantined. So that source is out of the picture. And the other was hive parts that were stored in the barn that the family had some time ago, and they had no idea that the reason the colonies died was because they had American foul brood. And so this guy, 2 years in a row, brought, his hives died, his colonies died rather, and 2 years in a row got some more boxes out and lost his colonies. In the meantime, exposing everybody within a couple miles of him with American foul brood. So do not buy used hive parts, particularly the boxes and frames, unless you can verify for absolute certain that they did not have American foul brood in them. Otherwise, buy new, save yourself a lot of grief and your neighbors. And so, as I mentioned, start with a Langstroth style. There are different kinds of hives, and there are some pluses and minuses of the hives, but the Langstroth is the most widely used because of its simplicity and because it's easily inspected, looking for diseases and condition of the colony. So the Langstroth also, the parts are very widely available. You can go to every beekeeping supplier and get parts for Langstroth hives. They're pretty much standardized. There are going to be more mentors and advisors available to you. Not everybody knows anything about Moiré hives or top bar hives or some of the other kinds that there are out there. So you're going to have more people who understand and can advise on managing colonies in Langstroth style of hives. The Langstroth style is what I showed you in those pictures. The stacked boxes and the removable frames. And in certain kinds of management in Langstroth, they're also a little bit easier than in some kind of hives. So personal protective gear, again, we don't want to spend a real lot of time on this, but you will need something to protect your face. You can go from something really simple like wearing a veil, and the rest of your protective equipment is your own long sleeve shirt and long pants and closed-toed shoes. So you could get by with a veil for 25 bucks, or you can buy a full suit for 190 bucks or more. It's your choice. You can do it however you want. As long as you put that thing around your face. You don't want to be getting stung around the face and neck for allergy reasons. Also, you will have the choice of whether you want to wear gloves or not. I think most beekeepers, when they start out, do wear gloves to prevent getting stung on the fingers and hands, because your hands and fingers are in the bees. That's why you're pulling frames out and the bees are there. So protecting your hands from being stung, you can use a box of 15 mil nitrile gloves, which are like mechanics gloves. Dishwashing gloves work slick too. They're about 20 mils. Or you can buy these fancy dancy leather gloves at 30 bucks a pair from the beekeeping supplier. So your choice. The other thing is, with leather gloves, you really don't have much dexterity handling frames and equipment. Whereas with these other lighter duty gloves, you do have better dexterity. But again, it doesn't matter what you get. It's your choice. Mini gaiters protect your ankles. I can tell you that getting stung around the ankles and feet, man, that hurts. That hurts so bad. It's like getting stung on the ear. If you ever get stung on the ear, that hurts. It really does. Where you've got no muscles hanging in there, man, that hurts. So you can have long pants, but sometimes the long pants don't cover your ankles. And if you have, if you're having issues with getting stung around the feet and ankles, you can get a pair of mini gaiters, and they're not too expensive. They're like snow gaiters, except they're short. Snow gaiters are what a lot of skiers and snowshoers wear to keep snow out of their boots. So actual tools now, the tools you'll need to manage the frames, pull the frames out, to calm the bees down, things like that. A hive tool, and I've got pictures of this stuff here. So we'll show you what this stuff looks like if you don't know already. A good smoker, you can get a standard smoker for 35, and you get a really expensive one for 70. I'd go somewhere in between there. You don't have to have a really high-end smoker for a small scale operation. There are some medium price smokers that work just great. Smoker fuel, you should not have to buy smoker fuel. You can get burlap from coffee companies. You can collect spruce cones from Colorado blue spruces, which, by the way, make great fuel. You can get white pine needles. You can rake up white pine needles, and those make excellent fuel by themselves, but they also make starter fuel. You can get some inexpensive fuels like wood pellets, but there's a lot of free stuff out there too, just out of the environment, that you can gather. And you can do some research and find out what sort of native smoker fuels are available. You don't have to pay for smoker fuel. I've never paid for smoker fuel ever. Frame grips are an optional thing, but if you have issues with lifting stuff with this pinching motion that's required, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm like lifting a frame up out. These frames can weigh 10 pounds. They can weigh 7 or 8 pounds. There's plus some resistance at first pulling them up out of the boxes. If you find that kind of thing difficult, you can get a frame grip, or you can actually grip it with your fist and pull the frame out like this. And again, I'll get a picture here in just a second. Spacing tool is helpful, and that's one of these how-to things for later in the season, but they aren't expensive. It's a good idea to have them. And a bee brush is also going to be an essential thing. So,
Fred, what do you use for smoker fuel? You said you don't buy any. What do you typically use?
I use spruce cones and burlap combination, depending upon what I have the most of at any time. I had a Colorado blue spruce that's since disappeared out of my backyard, but I've got enough boxes of Colorado blue spruce cones to last until 2034, maybe, somewhere in there. But I also have some burlap from a coffee company too. But I use white pine needles to get it started. They're really a great fire starter. They start no matter what. And so that'll start the other fuels, and then I'll go to a heavier. You can't use white pine cones and some of the other big cones because they don't fit in the smoker very well. They're too big. But smaller spruce cones are slick. They do fit in the smoker and they work great. I've seen people use grass clippings, but you got to get the grass clippings really, really dry. Another type of smoker fuel is untreated baling twine. The sisal baling twine, as long as it's not treated, and you have to make sure to ask that. But untreated baling twine makes a fine smoker fuel, and so some farms don't know what to do with it and are happy to get rid of it. But you just have to make sure it's untreated. So this is a hive tool. They have different shapes and sizes. This is your basic hive tool. It's really all you need. You can get some fancier ones, but this is 8 or 10, 12 bucks for a good one. This is the frame spacing tool I told you about, and this would be used to space frames in your supers, your honey supers, those top boxes where the honey is being stored. And this is you would use these in an 8-frame box where you're pulling one of the frames out, creating some extra space. But you have to be careful doing that, and we'll talk more about that in a how-to session. You can't leave too much space because then they start building this wonky comb in between, wax comb in between the frame. But this frame spacer will help you get the frames exactly where they need to be, so bees won't do that. But it also allows the bees to store more honey on a frame. This is what a smoker looks like. This is what that frame grip looks like. The frame is gripped down here in these claws, and then you're grabbing onto this handle up here. You need a couple of these. You could probably get by with one, but it's helpful to have two. But that's a frame grip, and that's an optional thing. But if you have difficulty pinching, if you have arthritis in your hands, or just don't have, the hands just aren't that strong, a frame grip can make the whole job of pulling frames much easier. And of course, the bee brush. You have to have a bee brush, because there will come a time when you need to remove the bees from a frame, especially if you're just pulling one frame out to have the honey harvested. You got to get the bees off somehow, and that's how you do it, is with a bee brush. So this is a pest management thing. Varroa is it's a parasitic mite. It also is something that is ubiquitous in all of North America and most of the rest of the world. It actually came from Asia and Europe, and then was transported across to the Western Hemisphere. But even Australia, New Zealand were places that didn't have it, but even now they have Varroa destructor. It feeds off the bees, it weakens the bees, it transmits viruses to bees, much like mosquitoes transmit viruses to us. They inject viruses into the bees, and viruses for bees are very deadly. Bees don't have a robust immune system like we do, and they're not able to. It's like you and I getting a cold and we die. Everybody on this screen, we get a cold, we all die. We're not able to fend it off, and that's kind of how little robustness there is in a honeybee immune system. So the only way we have of dealing with that is to keep the Varroa population, and the real name on this is Varroa destructor. The size of the Varroa mite, they're visible. You can see them. You can look at your frames, you can look at the bees, and you can see Varroa mites on the bees. I don't have pictures here because our pest thing is coming up in a month or so. But in terms of how big they are, they're about the size of an outstretched hand on your body. That's about how big a Varroa mite is on a bee. It's big. I mean, and if you get 4 or 5 of these on a bee, it can drain their innards. It sucks their innards out. So we have to make sure to keep the population of Varroa destructor under control, and these are the things we need to do that. There's this Varroa. This is a one-time thing here. There are different ways of doing monitoring Varroa levels. Of Varroa Easy Check is there's a method for sampling the bees and determining how many mites there are per how many numbers of bees, and that's what this thing is for right here. It's a very simple thing to use and a very simple process. You need some alcohol to do that process. And then for dealing with the mites, these are 2 organic treatments that don't leave residues. They're safe for use when there's honey on. They are organic acids that are the same as we get in vegetables like spinach or rhubarb or, you know, food products like that. They're organic methods. There are other methods. We're not into a pest producing thing here now, but this just gives you an idea of some things that will work and how much they cost per year. So these are things you need to learn this first year. This mite management thing, it's a big deal. You don't ignore this one here. This is, you ignore this, and this is the number one reason why new beekeepers lose their bees, is because the varroa populations got out of control. And it's a season-long thing. So this is one of those things, when you take a class, they will tell you how to do this. And we will also tell you how to do this in some upcoming sessions. Club workshops are great for this. You'll actually do this. You'll have a hands-on chance to do this, to do the sampling and do the mite counts and actually do whatever treatments are necessary for controlling the mites. So in your first year, you may or may not get into harvesting honey. I know Colin Whitehouse, who's on here, his first year had great success. I think, Colin, you said you had something like 80 pounds of honey you got on your from your first colony, plus left a lot for them for winter, and they made it through winter and didn't starve. So, and my most recent mentee in Mendon, Vermont, had the same experience. She had 2 supers worth of honey. She took off, left 2 more on. You know, that was almost 80 pounds for her. It depends on the colony, and it depends upon how productive your location is. You might or might not need an extractor the first year. However, if you do, there's a big range in extractors. And I know Colin has had some thoughts on this too, Colin Whitehouse here. Price range for extracting equipment, small time. So we're talking small scale stuff here now. 4-frame extractors, 3, 6, 9 frame, not these big 20 or 50 or 100 frame extractors. You don't need anything that big. You do not need a 20 frame extractor. You don't even need a 12 frame extractor. A small 2-frame or 4-frame extractor for or 3, 6, 9 is good up to making 2,000 or 3,000 pounds of honey per year. That's kind of the capacity that these things have. So the price range here is going to be, you know, $700 for an inexpensive manual, you know, a hand drive driven extractor, up to one that's a little more expensive that has a motor drive on it. And once you get beyond dealing with 100 or 200 pounds of honey per year, you're probably going to want that motor drive. And in fact, I remember Colin Whitehouse here recommending at one of the sessions we did about a month or so ago. He said, if you're buying an extractor, get one that will handle will accept a motor drive in the future, because having a hand crank, they work and they work okay if you don't have too much honey to extract, but it's helpful to have the option to add the motor later, even if you don't get the motor now. But you got to pay attention when you're buying to have that option in the future. So the extractors can range anywhere from $550 to $1,250 for a small one, 3, 6, 9, 4-frame. Smaller extractors, which are all you're going to need for ages and ages, unless you get into big time commercial operation. You'll need I've got some pictures of these things here in a second. So an uncapping fork or a pull type uncapping fork is an uncapping knife. You can use for anything from a serrated bread knife that you put in hot water or you know, warm water, to a heated knife, an electric knife to uncap, you know, to remove the wax from frames, to the caps on the wax cells to be able to get the honey out. And an uncapping tank, but you can substitute other things for this, especially if you're small scale. You got to have some way of getting the bees out of the boxes. I mean, you don't want to be bringing the bees into your house or your garage or wherever it is that you're going to be extracting honey. You've got to get the bees out of the boxes before you can harvest the honey. And that's where these last 3 things here, the fume board and this liquid that the bees don't like the smell of, so it moves the bees out, or an escape board, which works in a different way. But you will need one or both of those to be able to extract honey. So here's what they look like. So the deluxe fork, this is not a scratching fork. They're uncapping scratchers, they call them, but this is way better, way different than that. It's for what's called a push and lift technique for removing cappings. It's very different from just scratching the surface of the frames, which you often hear recommended. I don't like that because it leaves a lot of shards of wax. It plugs everything up. But this kind of fork, this pull uncapper, it's a relatively new thing on the market. It hasn't been around too many years. Bread knife works fine too, especially if the comb is a little bit thicker. The same with an electric uncapping knife. And this is when we get into the point where we're talking about honey harvesting, we'll get into how to use these things. You'd need one of this kind of thing to uncap your frames. You can choose what you want. These are pricey, 100 and something bucks, and they have some that are close to 200. This can be $11 or $12, and these are in the same price range here. If you get them on eBay, they're actually pretty inexpensive. This is what an uncapping tank looks like. The frames would sit here on this wooden bar. As you're removing the cappings and the honey and the wax particles drop into that box, they don't get all over the floor. The honey drains through that little screen there, and then you can drain it off later on. Any extra honey that's in the cappings can be 10 to 15% of the honey on a frame can be in the cappings that you cut off with a knife. And so you want to be able to save that, and that's where an uncapping tank. You can use a tray of some type. You don't have to be fancy with this, but these are just some options. And then here are pictures of a couple of really good small scale extractors, the Lyson. This has a hand crank on it. So right now it's a manual, but it has the option to add a motor. And this one is a motorized Maxant 369. It comes, all of these have leg bases on them. But both of these, this is the lower end of the price range I showed you. And this is kind of the Cadillac of small extractors. It's a little on the higher side. I think you're $11 or $1,200 now with a motor. So that's the range of things, and that's just the kind of stuff that you'll need to be able to extract honey. Whatever you do, though, and someplace I had it here, but whatever you do, do not crush your comb. Don't take the comb on your frames and scrape it all off and crush it to get the honey to drain out. Wax comb is worth its weight in gold to the bees. It takes a huge amount of energy and the right circumstances for honeybees to even make comb in the first place. They are not going to make it all year long. It's only certain times of the year and certain population distributions in the hives, age ranges that is, that will make wax. So whenever you can get them to make wax, you do whatever you can to protect that wax and preserve it. You do not crush comb. You do not scrape the wax off on your hives to extract honey. Please don't.
Fred, there's a question about, can you just cut the comb off and let the honey drain by gravity?
You can, but it doesn't drain very well. I mean, you'd have to do it one side at a time. You can do that. You don't get a very complete drain. Depends upon how thick the honey is. The one thing that I didn't put in here either that I forgot, and I'm glad you brought this question up, whoever asked the question. You can do that, but there's a considerable variation in the thickness of honey that you pull, even capped honey. I have one of the things that, and I should have put a picture in here, I didn't, but you really should be getting a refractometer when you get to the point where you're harvesting honey. A refractometer meant for thick sugary liquids for honey. There are different kind of refractometers out there. They cost about $35 now, but it is how you can tell the moisture content of the honey. And we cover this in a future session, but you can't be harvesting honey that's 18 or 18.5% or more water. It has to be less than that. So that said, long way of getting around to your answer, honey can range anywhere from what I extract, 17.5% moisture, to a couple years ago, I was getting honey that was 15%. I had one that was 14.5, which is incredibly thick honey. 1% difference at those thick levels or concentrated levels is a big deal. So the stuff that's down around 15%, it might not drain out. Some of it might, but some of it might not. It might stay in there. You really need the centrifugal force. You can do it that way and it's not harmful. There's no hurt. Most of the honey probably will come out. But the thing about that is when you've done it by that method, you really aren't losing much in the long haul per se, as long as you can get most of the honey out and it's not dripping all over the place once you put those frames back into the hive. That's the concern about gravitation, honey extraction by gravity, is you have to be able to get most of the honey out of the frames so that it doesn't flow all over the place once you put the rest of that, put that remaining honey in the frames back into the hives. That can kill your queens, it can kill bees, it can they get all sticky and get anchored down and die. But if you can get the honey to drain out, if it's not too thick, it works. I mean, people do that. It's far better than crushing your comb. And the thing about it is that any honey that's left in the frames that you can't get even with an extractor, and there will always be some residue, will go back into the hive. The bees will restore that stuff. They'll clean up all the frames, all the stickiness that you might have made through the extracting process. They'll store that all back into the cells, and either you'll get it the next time around or the bees will have it to use for winter. It won't be lost. The only thing is that by gravity is that thing about if there's too much left, it can make a sticky mess that the bees have a hard time contending with. That's the only downside to that. But it is a good method. It can work. So fall and winter prep, and these are just looking ahead. And we have a really great session in September talking about the process for winter prep, and it's a critical series of things that we do around mid-September, getting colonies ready for the winter, assessing if they're going to be able to make it through winter, and if not, then what do we need to do to get them ready? So in order to, and one of the things we do at that time is we weigh the hives. There's a target weight that we want hives to be at, depending upon how many boxes there are going to be on during the winter. But you need to have, and I'll show you a picture of this here in a second. The simplest way is a couple of bathroom scale. That mentee that I had, I think she told me, well, she had great difficulty dealing with heavy boxes. She's not a big person. And so she had to have help many times, and she couldn't weigh hives the traditional way. So she developed what I'm going to show you here, where we're using a couple of analog bathroom scales to weigh the hives, and then she could do that on her own. Mouse guards, feeder shims. I'll show you some pictures here. This is so you can add food in the winter if they run low on honey. And right now, most of us are feeding some of our colonies at this point in the winter. Foam board insulation, this is for the cover, and I'll show you about that here in a second. Some kind of a wrap or insulating material, and wrapping does help. That's what the research says. Feeders, like we just talked about, to get colonies up to weight. You won't leave the feeders on, especially that kind that we showed you before, the top feeders or the cans or jars. You wouldn't leave them on during the winter because that's liquid, but getting them ready for winter, you would have those feeders. And then some kind of bee food, which would be either sugar, table sugar, or stuff that you can buy from a beekeeping supplier. And again, costs here relatively nominal and highly variable. Some colonies will need very little or nothing to get ready for winter, and others will need to gain 50 pounds of weight, which means 50 gallons of syrup, that sugar syrup that's got to go on. So, or plus or minus. So some may need very little getting ready for winter, and some might need more. All will need the insulation and wrap material. So the foam board is right here, like I showed you here. The foam board goes inside your telescoping cover, the outer cover, and it prevents condensation from forming at the top of the hive that could then drip back down on the bees during cold winter days. This is the double analog scale thing, where you lift up one end of the hive, put a scale underneath it, lift up the other end of the hive, put a scale underneath it, add the two weights together, and you know how much your hive weighs. Very simple. There are other more challenging ways of weighing your hive, but that is simple. And those analog scales at Walmart cost, I don't know, $14, $15 a piece, plus or minus. Don't get a glass scale, and don't get a fancy one for what we're doing. A mouse guard looks like this. It's a screen type of material that goes across the front entrance. It keeps mice out. And mice like to find these places, these protected places like the inside of your hives, especially in the fall, around September, early September, when the nights start getting cold. The mice will start moving in looking for protected places to live. So mouse guards have to go on early September. This is what wraps look like, a couple of different kind of wraps. This is a wrap that provides solar gain, heat gain during the winter. This is why you want your apiary to be exposed to the sun. That's this tar paper basically, and it will transmit heat through the paper into the box inside, and it will help keep the bees warm enough during the day so that they can move around to food sources. Wraps work the other way; they insulate. But in actuality, I use both of this kind. I stuck my hand inside the wrap that I had placed on a hive last October, late October. It was a sunny day, and that's supposed to be an R7 insulation in that wrap. But I stuck my hand down inside that wrap, and there was a considerable amount of heat buildup inside that wrap, even though the sunlight had to transmit through R7 insulation. There was a considerable amount of heat gain because it is black. So feeders, there's another top feeder for you, the one you were asking earlier about feeders. This is another type of top feeder, works really slick, and this is what the feeder shim looks like. Just create some space on the top of that. We'll show you how you need it. You will need it. You don't need it immediately, but you will need it inevitably. And you can make your own. You don't even have to buy these. This is just a 1-inch tall piece of wood, strips of wood, screwed or glued or nailed together, however you do it. But it creates space at the top of the hive where you can put solid food in if your bees are running short on food at this time of year. And then finally, the last few items here, miscellaneous windbreaks you might need. The cost can be really variable. If you're using snow fence, there will be a cost involved. If you're using pallets that you got from, leftover someplace, it's not going to cost you anything. Banding straps, highly advisable. So a banding strap, this is what a banding strap looks like. It's a galvanized metal thing. The only place I've seen where you can get them actually are from Man Lake Beekeeping Supply. You can also use ratchet straps. And two things that these do, they prevent, if we had a heavy duty windstorm here, December 23rd, 2022, that knocked over some of our hives on December 20th, like I said, December 23rd, but they were ratcheted, they were strapped. And so they didn't fall apart. The bees stayed inside, the bees were alive and made it through the winter. If the wind had knocked this hive over and it was unstrapped, the boxes would have fallen apart, the bees would have been exposed, and by the time anybody would have seen them, because these are not a backyard, these are in a remote apiary, by the time, or even if it was overnight, by the time you find them, the bees could be dead already. So strapping protects them from wind damage, but it also makes it very difficult for bears to get into there if they get through your electric fence. So this is basically a last line of defense. Heavy duty ratchet straps. These are not those cheapo inch jobbers. These are some 3,000-pound straps you get like from Home Depot. They're about 15 or 16 bucks a pop. These banding straps are $12.95 from Man Lake now. So take your pick. But ratcheting them down is a wise idea. So that's pretty much it. So here's kind of a sum total. All of those items we talked about above. First year expenses can range with extracting equipment from $1,500 to more than $3,500, depending upon how you decide to do things. Without the extracting equipment, you're talking $850 to a couple $1,000, again, depending upon how fancy you want to get. So these are the ranges, and you can save some money on some of these. Some of these things where you can build your own or do things a little less expensively. This is just like you're going out and buying the parts. On an ongoing basis now, second year, this is per colony. If you lose your bees, which is very common first year, you're going to have an additional cost of replacing those bees, and then some ongoing regular costs per hive, varroa management stuff, feeding if necessary, and is highly variable here. 135 to a couple $100 per hive is the expense that you would incur on an ongoing basis. So second year costs are much, much less than getting started. So this is a thing you need to consider. This is not a cheap business to get into. The other thing, which isn't a money thing, is that you really need to have time. Time to learn, like we talked about early on here. Time to manage the colonies. You're going to be out there every 7 to 10 to 14 days inspecting those colonies. And then there will be some seasonal actions in the fall. Varroa management, mite management assessments, varroa management assessments and treatments. So all sorts of actions that are going to happen, but they take time. And it can't be that, well, I don't have time this weekend, I'm going to do it next weekend or the weekend after. No, you can't do it that way. It's like feeding cows or feeding your pets or feeding any sort of agricultural critter. They can't wait. Certain actions, you're not going to have to be there managing your colonies every single day, but you can't leave them for months on end either. I had a person who I was helping for a while, but she was gone for 2 months in the beginning of every summer. By the time she got back, her colonies had swarmed. They were overwhelmed with honey. They had been honey bound, stuff that you normally would take care of on a week-to-week basis. You can't plan on big long vacations in the summertime if you've got honeybees, unless you've got somebody to care for those colonies. And you have to have the ability to respond to time-sensitive actions, like all of a sudden there are swarm queen cells in your colony. What do I do now? We'll tell you about these. We'll show you how to recognize this and what to do, and also then time to harvest the honey. So just as a thing to think about, if you already are really booking hard, trying to keep up with daily life, running from one thing to the next, this is probably not the endeavor for you yet. Now, there may come a time. The class that I went through had 2 people, one of whom who had kids, and the other of whom was a real estate agent. And both of them decided in the end that they did not have time to take on another time-consuming task like beekeeping. So they did not become beekeepers. And that's totally okay. There are things that you can do to help bees besides keeping bees. And that's kind of what we emphasize for new beekeepers. There are other things, if you're looking to help bees or pollinators, there are other things you can do besides keeping bees. So you have to think about this. Is it realistic that you're going to be able to take on another farming like this? Is basically an agricultural endeavor. Are you going to have time to take on a set of farming practices here, managing livestock, which is what bees are considered? So just think about that. If you have the time, great. We're going to do the best we can to help you be successful. And this is an assessment that you have to make. I can't make this for you. I can just say you need to think about this, because this endeavor does take some time that you'll have to have the time to do it. So with that, I'm done.
Hey, let's open it
Have
up to
any-
more questions. Let me
Sure.
ask, we have Colin Whitehouse is with us this evening. And first of all, thank you, Colin, for answering many of the chat questions. But Colin, you're entering your second year. Is there anything in the presentation that resonated with you in particular, or something that you want to bring up or maybe emphasize? Any particular thoughts?
No, I think the presentation was pretty accurate. Before I got into beekeeping, I did not attend a class like this. I just my friend got bees and I kind of got drawn into it. But I think Fred presented really good information, and I think it does cover a lot of stuff. I think if you are interested in doing it and you do have the time, don't let the presentation maybe scare you away thinking, oh my God, there's so much to learn and stuff. It's really, there is a lot to learn, but I think it can be very fun as well. So I would recommend it if you have the time and interest.
Okay,
I-
great.
I
Thanks,
just want
Tom.
I just want you to go into this with an awareness of what it all involves. I too don't want this to scare you away. If you listen to all of this, a lot of this stuff is you learn as you go. You don't know everything on day one. You learn as you go, and that's what we're going to try to help you with. But if after looking at this, you say, I still think this is something I'd like to try, go for it. It's a real gut punch when your colonies die. But I'll tell you what, the sense of elation when they make it through that first winter, it's pretty big. And when you get that first box of honey, that's a pretty big deal. It makes you feel really good. So, if it's something you still think you want to do, there's a lot to learn, but you can learn it as you go.
Okay. Any questions? Questions people want to ask? Just jump in at this point.
Hey, Dean, were you the one who contacted me a couple days ago?
About which? About what?
I had a sixth grader contact me a couple weeks
Yes,
ago.
that was
You?
me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm the one who answered you.
Okay, I didn't see that. I need to go,
Okay.
yeah, I didn't see that.
Okay.
I'll go check that after.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Fred, somebody's asked, do people use anything specific to keep the grass down around the hives? I'll just for myself, I just put on my jacket and veil, and I just go in there with a weed whacker, a couple times a season and just whack it down. I don't know, Fred, what do you do?
I'm a lot fancier than that. I have my apiaries are located in the view shed of some homes, and they have to be kept pretty well manicured. But yeah, most of the time a weed whacker. The main thing about apiary management, and this is in the electric fence presentation that we did last week, and that PowerPoint is going to be on the website here shortly, is to keep the weeds trimmed from underneath the fences.
Yeah.
Or that you mulch underneath the fence lines. Either way, but that's the most important place to keep the weeds down. The rest, if you don't have to keep it fancy dancy looking, I have to mow mine with a lawnmower and a string trimmer. But it's not a big deal. It's a 10-minute job. But in any case, a string trimmer is all it really takes. Just the main thing is the electric fence lines. Oh yeah, you bet they're bothered by the mower. I saw that pop up. I wear my suit. I mean, I have a bee jacket and a veil, and I wear my gloves. The thing about if you are going to use a lawnmower or a riding tractor or anything like that, if you're at dusk and it's cold and the bees aren't flying, you might get away with it as long as you don't hang around the entrances for too long. It's the entrances where you're going to have issues. It's not on the side or the back.
Yeah.
But you also have to be careful if you are mowing with a lawnmower of any type around a beehive, is that you point the exhaust away from the entrance. Hot exhaust will light their fires. Literally, they get mad really fast if you have a hot lawnmower exhaust blowing at their entrance. So whatever direction you're going in, just make sure the exhaust is blowing away from the entrance of the hive. But yeah, so I try to mow without suiting up. I say, I think I can get away with it this time. 5 times out of 6, it doesn't work that way. I get stung and I have to go get suited up anyway to finish the mowing job. So yeah, just put your jacket on and you can mow around them just fine. And then they calm right down after that. No problem.
I have a question. Do you just get like used to being stung all the time?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Do you just get used to getting stung? Like,
oh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. No. You never get used to them being stung. No. It hurts every single time. It hurts. I don't care how many times you get stung, it hurts. Now, the thing that does happen though, and the reason why this is a good question, when you first start beekeeping and you're being stung, but being stung is inevitable. It's part of the business. You are going to be stung. What you're trying to do is minimize the amount that you get stung by wearing protective equipment. But that's not foolproof. They sometimes can sting through your jacket or through your gloves to a certain extent. But it does hurt. But what happens when you first start out with beekeeping is you tend to get the sting area gets swollen up and it's itchy. Sometimes that'll last for 3, 4, 5 days. And that will be something that's really common. It happens to most everybody. What I noticed after between year 2 and year 3 beekeeping, something changed, and I no longer swell up and get real itchy. That something changed. You develop a tolerance to the point where you don't get the swelling and the itchiness. It still hurts when that sting goes in. Oh man, it hurts. But anymore, it doesn't swell up and it doesn't last for days. It's gone in a few minutes. You hardly even notice it anymore.
And I might have had a nice colony this year, but I didn't get stung that many times. So it's not like every time you open your colony, you're going to get stung.
And that's a highly variable thing, Colin. That's a good point. Some colonies are extremely defensive and some not so defensive. And particularly if you have a large colony, the number one reason why bees come boiling out at you and sting when you're near them is that they're crowded in their colony. You get really, really crowded. They tend to boil out and come at you more. But there is some variation both from colony to colony and also from time of year to time of year. So when there's a drought, nectar is not being produced during drought times, the flowers are dry, and so the bees aren't able to collect nectar and produce honey, and they get really defensive of their stores, of the honey that they've stored. So they can be really defensive during drought periods, or as winter approaches, they also tend to become more defensive. During much of the year, they sometimes are not defensive at all. So it just varies depending upon the time of the year and the colony too.
Yeah, I'll also add too, if you do get stung, you want to get the stinger out of the place where you got stung. You don't want to leave that stinger in, and you'll be able to see it right in the center.
Yep. Yep. Well, one of the advantages too of wearing clothing, you see some people working around apiaries in t-shirts and shorts. You know, you can do that if you want to, but I don't. Even after all these years, I still fully suit up. What you really need to do is what you're comfortable with. You don't go out there wearing minimal or no protective equipment because somebody else said, oh, try it, you'll get used to it. Well, you got to do what doesn't make you afraid too. So if you're fearful of getting stings, suit up, wear the PPE and ignore what everybody else is saying. Do what you feel comfortable with. If you want to wear gloves, wear gloves. If you want to wear a full suit, wear a full suit. Whatever makes you feel comfortable working around your bees, because it can be frankly scary at some times of the years when those bees come boiling up out at you. It can be a little bit unnerving. And so having to worry on top of that about being stung just accentuates the fear factor. So protect yourself as much as is necessary to make you feel comfortable working around your bees.
I would suggest wearing some kind of an outfit to prevent stinging until you know you're not going to react to a sting. If you go in with a t-shirt and those bees come out and you get stung 10 times, and you have a reaction, you're going to have a problem. And that's one thing most beekeepers should know about, what to recognize when you are having an allergic reaction, what to do, and even just a general sting, how to treat that sting. What can you put on it? What can you take? Benadryl, something. Know all that's available. Like Robin said, the key is to take the stinger out because it'll continue to pump venom. Yep. And so, I wouldn't go in with haphazard. I've been doing it for over 25 years and I still wear equipment. You never know when you're going to happen. I've had members of our bee club beekeep for 10 years and then all of a sudden have allergic reactions and they had to get out of beekeeping. So it's a never-ending or changing situation.
And I had forgotten to include this, Tony, so thanks for bringing this up. We had mentioned it in the last new beekeeper session we did back in January, and I forgot to bring it up tonight. Really, if you're really not certain about your sensitivity to bee venom, you probably should get tested by an allergist first, rather than take a chance on having a life-threatening anaphylaxis happen when you're out and nobody necessarily around you. My first mentee I ever had went from losing all of his bees the first year to having 100% successful overwintering his second year, and he was into his third year working his bees, and he only had 4 colonies, but one of them was a really defensive colony. It would chase people down the road for a quarter mile. And he forgot to zip up the veil. Right here, there's a zipper around your neck, and he forgot to zip that up, and a whole bunch of bees got up inside the veil around his face and neck. So he had been good working with his bees up until then, but he had so many stings around the face and neck, he developed an anaphylaxis, an anaphylactic reaction there. His wife unfortunately had an EpiPen and gave him a hit with an EpiPen. She had to give him a second hit. The rescue squad had to give him a third hit, and the hospital had to give him a fourth hit because he had such a severe reaction. It was all of a sudden being stung a lot all at once. So what Tony said is very valid. You don't want that to happen, and that's why I too still fully suit up. I don't mess around when I'm managing bees. I gloves, jacket, veil, long pants, whole thing. Don't push it.
If you have to use an EpiPen, you better be on your way to the hospital after you've used it.
If you have to use an EpiPen, you
because-
really ought to be considering that this may not be the thing for you too.
Oh, yeah. Well, that would be a subsequent decision, but the first decision would be to get on your way to the hospital.
Exactly.
It doesn't end when you use, like you said, it doesn't end when you hit yourself with the EpiPen.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Heidi has a question.
Recently we watched one of Mike Palmer's videos about the venom that remains on your beekeeping protective gear that can be quite dangerous if you're not being stung regularly. Can any of you speak to that? He claimed that it was quite dangerous for people who are not working in the apiary and kids or spouses who maybe were not involved.
You're getting into a question of toxicology. So poisons are most rapidly affect you most rapidly when they are injected, which is what a bee does. It injects venom into you, and so the reaction is fast. It's really quick. It's like getting an injection into your veins by a doctor. The second quickest way of having a reaction from an item is to breathe it in. It's going into your lungs, which is not a factor with bee venom. You don't breathe that stuff in. And the third, the slowest way of having, and the third way is in ingesting, eating something. That's the third quickest way. And the slowest way of having any kind of reaction is by absorption, which is what you're talking about, where somebody would potentially touch the bee venom and then potentially could be absorbed in. Frankly, I've never heard of a single case of that actually happening. It's possible, but I guess, but absorption is basically, this bee venom doesn't last that long on your clothing. It degrades pretty quickly. And you're going to, any place where you get stung, you're going to smoke it. You're going to use your smoker and smoke it anyway, which is going to keep the bees away, but also that stuff degrades pretty fast on the cloth, and it's really not going to affect somebody else.
Super.
They have to
Thank
literally
you.
rub it all over themselves and have a lot of it to really have that matter. That's just a strict toxicology principle thing.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Well, it's starting to get late. Let's take one more question and then we'll wrap this session up. Any last questions? Who wants to go last? Okay, if not, Fred, thank you so much. This was a terrific presentation. Thanks, Colin, again for your support and Tony, for yours as well. It was a great job. And again, I urge everybody, for folks on this, if you're not already a member of the VBA, it will be the smartest investment you'll ever make in your beekeeping journey.
You bet. We have a long series of workshops coming up this summer. There were 20 altogether, and we've already been through about a half a dozen of them. But the technical ones are the ones coming up yet.
Yeah.
And these are the ones that are going to be most helpful. Now you've got your bees. Now what do I do? And we're looking ahead a month or 6 weeks. What should I be doing in the next month or 6 weeks until we get back together with another Ask Me Anything session?
Yep.
So thanks everybody for coming.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.
Hey, Dean, stay on for a second.